Imagine this. You're in a room full of people. There's music, chatter, laughter. The kind of atmosphere that's supposed to feel alive, connected, human. But you feel like you're watching it all through glass. You nod at the right moments. Smile when someone tells a joke. Say, "That's interesting," when someone repeats an idea you've heard 100 times. But inside, you're somewhere else, somewhere deeper. You're analyzing the conversation beneath the conversation. You're hearing the fear behind the confidence, the mimicry beneath the opinions. You notice how people don't really listen. They just wait for their turn to speak. You wonder why no one ever asks real questions. You wonder why you feel so alone in a crowd full of faces. And maybe, for a long time, you thought something was wrong with you. You tried to tone yourself down, simplify your thoughts, hide your depth. You tried to be more relatable, more likable, more easy to digest. But the more you did, the more it hurt. Because here's the paradox no one talks about. The more perceptive you are, the lonelier it becomes. The more you understand about people, systems, suffering, the harder it is to pretend you don't. And so you carry this quiet ache, not just of being alone, but of being unseen. You're not antisocial, you're not arrogant. You just see through things, too quickly, too clearly. And most of the world, it wasn't designed for that. It rewards simplicity, not complexity. Agreement, not inquiry. Obedience, not original thought. So if your mind doesn't conform, you become inconvenient, uncomfortable, unwelcome. And what happens when people feel discomfort around someone? They pull away, they talk around you, they dismiss you with phrases like, "You think too much," or "You're too intense," as if insight is a flaw, as if curiosity is a threat. And maybe you start to believe them. Maybe you start to wonder if it would just be easier to go quiet. But deep down, you know the truth. You don't want to be superior. You want to be understood. You don't need a crowd. You just want real conversation. You don't crave attention. You crave depth. And yet, in a world that thrives on surface, where depth is mistaken for danger, where does that leave you? Where does it leave the overthinker in a culture of distraction? The idealist in a system built for compromise? The pattern seer in a world addicted to denial? And here's the most unsettling question of all. What if intelligence, real intelligence, isn't socially rewarded at all? What if it's punished? What if it triggers fear more than admiration? What if society doesn't fear ignorance? It fears awareness. Because to be truly intelligent isn't just to process information. It's to see systems, to see shadows, to see beneath. And once you see, you can't unsee. You see the falseness in polite conversation, the manipulation behind certain rules, the way language is used to conceal, not reveal, the way people trade authenticity for acceptance over and over again. And maybe, just maybe, you've stayed silent about what you see. Not because you're unsure, but because you already know how people react to the ones who notice too much. Because when you name the lie, you become the threat. When you challenge the script, you become the villain. When you don't laugh at what everyone else laughs at, you become the stranger. So you learn to keep it in, to nod, to smile, to shrink. And yet the ache remains, that ache of knowing and not being known, of seeing and not being seen. And so you wonder, is the price of intelligence isolation? Is insight the same thing as exile? Or worse? Are we living in a world that teaches smart people to disappear? Because here's the part no one tells you. Maybe your loneliness isn't a flaw. Maybe it's a consequence of depth, of perception, of daring to think when thinking is inconvenient. And if that's true, then this isn't just a personal issue. It's a societal one, a cultural one, a psychological one. a crisis of connection disguised as individual discomfort. So let's ask the question society refuses to face. Why is it that the people with the most insight often feel the most invisible? Why do truth-tellers so often walk alone? And what is it about real intelligence, not the kind that conforms, but the kind that questions, that makes it so terrifying to the collective mind? We'll go there, because understanding this isn't just about making sense of your solitude. It's about exposing the deeper structure that creates it. And it begins with one hidden force, quietly shaping the way we treat those who think too deeply, feel too much, and refuse to play small. Let's go deeper. There's a moment, often early in life, when a deeply perceptive person realizes something unsettling. The world doesn't always reward truth. It rewards agreement. You ask a sincere question, and you're told to stop being difficult. You notice a contradiction, and someone says, "Just let it go." You express an unpopular opinion, and the air changes. People shift, pull back, get uncomfortable. And so the message is clear, even if it's never spoken out loud. Thinking for yourself comes at a cost. That's the beginning of the fracture. Not just between you and others, but between your intelligence and your ability to belong. Psychologists call this social conformity bias, the tendency to adjust our beliefs and behaviors to align with the group. It's rooted in evolution. In the past, being cast out of the tribe meant death, so we developed a survival mechanism. Stay in line, don't challenge the group, keep the peace, even at the cost of your truth. But what happens when your brain is wired to question, to spot inconsistencies, to crave depth, not just security? That's when intelligence becomes a burden. Carl Jung called this the individuation process, the journey of becoming your true self, even when that self no longer fits the tribe. But Jung warned, individuation is a lonely path. It often requires walking away from inherited beliefs, cultural conditioning, and collective approval. And in a society that confuses comfort with safety, the individuated person becomes a threat. You see, intelligence, real intelligence, isn't just IQ or the ability to memorize data. It's the ability to observe reality without flinching, to see contradiction without denial, to hold multiple truths at once without collapsing into confusion. And that kind of awareness doesn't just change how you think. It changes how you relate to everything. To systems, to authority, to tradition, to language, to people. And here lies the hidden problem. Society is not built for thinkers, it's built for followers. Because thinkers ask, why? Why do we do it this way? Why is this considered normal? Why does no one question this? And that kind of inquiry threatens the fragile scaffolding of the collective illusion. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves to be like other people." And intelligent people, truly awake people, often realize that price is too high. But the moment you stop forfeiting yourself to fit in, is the moment the crowd begins to pull away. Because we live in a culture that idolizes intelligence in theory, but punishes it in practice. We love the idea of a genius. Until that genius exposes something uncomfortable, we celebrate critical thinking. Until it criticizes what we believe, we praise innovation. Until it threatens our routine. So the intelligent person finds themselves in a strange position, encouraged to succeed, but expected to conform, taught to think, but told to be quiet, rewarded for performance, but rejected for authenticity. And because intelligence often comes paired with emotional sensitivity, a heightened awareness of nuance, tone, energy, this contradiction doesn't just register intellectually. It hurts. It feels like betrayal, like exile. It's no wonder so many deep thinkers begin to withdraw. Not because they hate people, but because they've been burned by the shallowness of collective interaction. And yet, most don't talk about this. because the narrative around intelligence is still wrapped in ego. We're told that smart people are arrogant, that they isolate themselves, that they're antisocial, too analytical, too rigid. But what if that's a projection? What if society tells the intelligent they're flawed, not because it's true, but because it's easier than facing what they expose? What if isolation is not a personal failure, but a symptom of a deeper sickness? A culture that fears depth, a system that punishes awareness, a society that silences those who see too clearly. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote that hell is other people, but perhaps he meant hell is being around people who refuse to be real, who speak in scripts, who fear difference, who retreat from truth like it's fire. And so the intelligent person, in a desperate bid to preserve their peace, begins to edit themselves. They water down their thoughts. They fake interest in shallow conversations. They wear masks to avoid conflict. And slowly, they disappear. Not because they want to, but because the world gives them no space to be whole. This is the hidden cost of intelligence. Not just being misunderstood, but being systematically pushed into solitude by a world that cannot hold what you carry. But what if the problem isn't you? What if the problem is a culture that has pathologized clarity, that has made depth dangerous, that calls your sensitivity too much, your intellect intimidating, your insights conspiratorial? And if that's true, what happens to those who continue to edit themselves just to survive? That's where the consequences begin. Subtle at first, but devastating over time. And that's where we go next, because isolation doesn't just hurt. It reshapes who you are. And if we don't bring that into the light, you'll keep blaming yourself for a loneliness that was never yours to carry. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't wake up one day and decide, I'm done with people. Instead, it begins with small withdrawals. You start shortening your sentences because people interrupt before you finish. You stop sharing your excitement because your curiosity gets called too intense. You hesitate before asking the question that's actually on your mind, the real question, because you've learned that truth tends to change the room. So you adapt, not out of ego, but out of emotional survival. You nod when you want to challenge. You smile when you want to scream. You play along, not because you're fake, but because you've realized that honesty feels like confrontation in a world built on pretense. And here's the tragedy. The more intelligent you are, the better you become at hiding how much you're shrinking. You mask it in humor. You cloak it in silence. You wrap your insights in metaphors, hoping someone, anyone, will pick up the thread and meet you in the deep. But most don't. So you retreat, just a little, and again, until retreat becomes your rhythm. And slowly, invisibly, you begin to doubt yourself. Because here's what no one tells you. When the world consistently misunderstands your thoughts, you start to wonder if your thoughts are the problem. When your emotional depth is dismissed as too sensitive, you start to wonder if your feelings are flawed. When your hunger for truth is labeled as overthinking, you start to fear your mind itself is too much. This is the invisible erosion of self, not caused by loud rejection, but by quiet, repeated dismissal. It's not the shouting that breaks you. It's the silence after you've said something true. It's the awkward pause when your insight is met with confusion, not curiosity. It's the way people change the subject when you bring the conversation below surface level. And over time, this changes your nervous system. You begin to associate expression with pain, authenticity with danger, depth with exile. Your body keeps the score, just like trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk warned. And in this case, the trauma is subtle. Not born of violence, but of emotional starvation, of being surrounded by people, yet intellectually and spiritually malnourished. You find yourself in relationships where you have to shrink to keep the peace, in conversations where you're the only one asking why, in a society that teaches you that staying quiet is the price of being accepted. So you stop raising your hand. You stop challenging the script. You stop reaching out. And what was once isolation becomes your new normal, not because you hate connection, but because you've mistaken loneliness for safety. And here's the most insidious part. The world rewards your withdrawal. You're called easygoing, low maintenance, a great listener. They praise your quietness, not knowing it's born from exhaustion. They celebrate your stillness, not knowing it's built on years of rejection. They admire your solitude, not knowing it's the shell you built after realizing your mind doesn't fit the mold. And so, you disappear, not from life, but from your life. You become a ghost in your own skin, present, but not seen, alive, but not felt. And society will let you vanish quietly, because invisibility is convenient. No one questions the silence of those who once spoke too deeply, but that silence comes at a cost paid in authenticity, in intimacy, in meaning. Because we cannot connect where we cannot be ourselves. We cannot belong if our truth is hidden. We cannot love if we are pretending to be less than we are. And so the cycle tightens. The more isolated you feel, the more you hide. The more you hide, the more unseen you become. The more unseen you are, the more you believe the lie that no one could ever understand you. And that lie, it becomes a cage. Not made of steel, but of silence. Polished with the praise of being strong, independent, fine on your own. But you're not fine. You're fragmented, split between who you are and who the world will tolerate. And here's the final consequence. You start to question whether you deserve to be known at all. Whether there's a place for people like you. People who think too much, feel too deeply, question too often. And maybe you've stopped looking for that place. Maybe you've convinced yourself that the answer is to stay distant, stay quiet, stay safe. But what if it's not? What if your isolation isn't inevitable, but learned? And what if the way out isn't about changing the world, but changing how you see your place in it? That's the rebellion, and that's where we go next. Rebellion doesn't always come with fire. Sometimes it comes with a whisper, a moment of stillness where you finally say, no more pretending, no more self-editing, no more trading truth for tolerance. That's the moment it starts. Not when the world changes, but when you do, internally, quietly, with fierce conviction. Because here's the truth. If you've been misunderstood your whole life, you don't need to become easier to understand. You need to stop explaining yourself to people who aren't even listening. This is the first act of rebellion, self-reclamation. And it doesn't look like grand gestures. It looks like showing up in conversations without dumbing yourself down. It looks like letting the silence sit when your thoughts aren't met with applause. It looks like honoring the ache instead of running from it. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what he didn't say, at least not directly, is that becoming who you truly are requires disappointing almost everyone who expected you to be someone else. And that's the second act of rebellion, willingness to be misunderstood. You will not be universally liked. You will not be fully seen by the masses. You will not be safe in all rooms. But that's the cost of authenticity. Not ego, not performance, truth. Because here's the shift. You don't need to fix your isolation. You need to befriend it. Make space for the quiet. Make space for the discomfort. Make space for the part of you that was exiled. Not because it was wrong, but because it was rare. That's what intelligent people forget. You're not alone because you're broken. You're alone because your mind is expansive in a world that rewards small talk. But solitude doesn't have to mean suffering. Solitude is the soil where self-trust grows, where insight deepens, where the noise of conformity fades and your real voice starts to rise again, raw, unpolished, awake. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and father of logotherapy, once said, "Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how." So what's your why? Is it truth, clarity, freedom, creation, depth? Choose it, and let that become your anchor. Because once you reconnect to purpose, you no longer need to perform. You just need to live it. And from that place, something radical happens. You begin to attract people who recognize you. Not because you tried to fit in, but because you stopped trying at all. Because when you stop camouflaging, when you stop mirroring shallowness just to avoid discomfort, you create a signal that resonates at a different frequency. And the right people, people who are also awake, also deep, also exiled, they'll feel it. That's how the new tribe begins. Not with a crowd, but with one soul who finally says, "I see you," and maybe they'll say it in words, or maybe just in the way they don't flinch when you speak your truth, in the way they pause instead of interrupting, in the way they challenge you, not to silence you, but to grow with you. This is what rebellion gives you, not popularity, not instant belonging, but integrity. And integrity is the beginning of everything. It's the state of being undivided, of no longer tearing yourself in two, the version that performs and the version that waits quietly behind the mask. The rebellion is not about becoming louder. It's about becoming whole. It's about walking into a room and refusing to abandon your depth, even when no one else is willing to go there. It's about allowing your mind to stretch without fear of who it might leave behind. It's about seeing your solitude not as exile, but as initiation. And from there, everything changes. Not because the world becomes easier, but because you stop betraying yourself to make it bearable. And that's when the ache begins to fade. Not completely, not forever, but enough for you to breathe deeper, speak freer, live wider, because this is the truth most deep thinkers forget. You were never meant to be digestible. You are meant to be real. You are meant to be rare. You are meant to be free. And that freedom, it begins the moment you stop waiting for the world to understand you and start understanding yourself. What if the isolation was never the problem? What if it was the invitation? What if every moment of silence, every instance of being misunderstood, every time you were labeled too much or too intense, wasn't proof that you're broken, but proof that you're awake in a world that's still half asleep? Here is the ultimate truth, the one you were never taught, because the systems around you depend on you not knowing. You are never meant to belong everywhere, because not everywhere is worthy of what you carry. Let that sink in. The loneliness you've felt isn't evidence that you're unlovable. It's evidence that your mind, your questions, your presence disrupts the script. And disruption? That's not a flaw, that's power. But no one tells you this growing up. No one teaches you that awareness comes with exile, that seeing too clearly makes you a mirror, and not everyone can bear their own reflection. So you internalize the wrong story, that something is wrong with you, that if you could just lighten up, fit in, tone it down, you'd finally be loved. But love born from dilution isn't love. It's negotiation. And you, with your depth, your clarity, your insight, were never meant to negotiate your soul. You were meant to evolve it, to protect it, to honor it, even when it costs you comfort, even when it costs you company, even when it costs you everything you thought you needed to be okay. Because the truth is this: belonging isn't about proximity. It's about recognition. And most people won't recognize you, not because you're invisible, but because they've never seen someone who refuses to be edited. You are not for everyone. You are not supposed to be. You are for the ones who've also been wandering. The ones who have stood in rooms full of people and still felt alone. The ones who overthink because underthinking feels like betrayal. The ones who question because accepting everything feels like death. You are for them. And they, when they find you, will feel like breath. But they will not find you if you keep hiding, if you keep shrinking, if you keep pretending to be less intelligent, less curious, less alive than you are. So here is the invitation. Stop asking how to fit in. Start asking how to come alive. Start asking who you could become if you stopped performing. Start asking what kind of world you could build if you stopped waiting for permission to be real. Because you are not here to be consumed. You are here to create, to awaken, to challenge, to shine a light into the corners others are afraid to look. And yes, that comes with solitude. But solitude is not absence. Solitude is space. Space for your mind to expand, for your truth to rise, for your soul to return. Because maybe the point was never to belong in a world that rewards illusion. Maybe the point was to remember who you are when the crowd walks away, to feel the ache and keep going, to walk alone and still speak truth, to be misunderstood and still refuse to disappear. That is not loneliness. That is power. And one day, someone will hear your voice and say, "There you are. I thought I was the only one." And in that moment, the path you walked alone becomes a bridge for someone else to return to themselves. That is what intelligent people forget. You are not the problem. You are the pattern breaker, the myth shatterer, the soul in a system trying to stay human. You scare the world, not because you're wrong, but because you're right. Too early. And that is your burden. But it is also your gift. So walk it. And if you must walk alone for now, walk bravely. Walk clearly, walk true, because the ones who walk alone today are the ones who will be followed tomorrow.